Hello, my name is Reiko Osoroshi. On this channel, I narrate Japanese ghost stories. Today, I will narrate ghost stories, Akemi-chan. Also, this time it's divided into a first part and a second part, so I would be delighted if you enjoy it. Akemi-chan Part 1. Here's the English translation of your story. A story from last May. After entering university and making some friends, one day, my good friend A called me. He said that our other friends, B and C, who I had also become close with, were coming over to hang out. It was already past 9 p.m., and A's apartment was located in the opposite direction from where I lived, across the university, and quite far away by train. It would take a while, and it seemed a bit inconvenient. However, with nothing else to do and it being a Saturday night, I decided to head to A's apartment. While waiting at the transfer station platform, I suddenly noticed that there were surprisingly few people waiting. I wondered if Saturday nights were always like this but didn't think much of it. I boarded the train without any worries. Inside the train, it was unusually empty, with just a pair of seemingly drunk passengers. I took a seat without thinking much and started playing with my phone. The two drunk individuals got off at the next station, leaving only a girl who appeared to be around my age, sitting across from me. At first, I didn't notice her, but when I stopped fiddling with my phone and looked up, I realized that she was exceptionally cute. She had black semi-long hair and gave off a slightly reserved vibe. To be honest, she was exactly my type. But, I had never spoken to a girl before, and being the same age as her, I didn't have the courage to start a conversation. I thought to myself, there's no way I'll ever meet someone, and while absent-mindedly staring, I happened to make eye contact with her. I'm in trouble, she might think I'm a creepy guy. I panicked, quickly, averting my gaze and pretending to look out the window the whole time, but it was probably obvious to anyone watching. The station I needed to get off at was still 5 stops away. I was torn, thinking, what should I do? Should I get off at the next station? But wouldn't that be even more suspicious? As I openly showed my anxiety, I heard a soft chuckle. Huh? I turned to face the girl, who was now looking at me with an amused smile. Then, she cheerfully asked me, what's wrong? Seriously? What is this, a scene from a manga? I thought to myself, amused by the situation. While trying to maintain composure, I replied, oh, it's nothing. I was just looking outside. But then, the girl giggled and said, you were looking at me, right? With a smile while moving closer to sit next to me. Internally delighted, I reluctantly admitted, sorry, I was looking at you. Over the next 15 minutes or so, I had a pretty lengthy conversation with the girl. Her name was Akemi, and she was apparently attending the same university as us, although in a different department. However, I didn't notice it at the time, but looking back on that conversation later, it was clear that Akemi's behavior was peculiar. She would talk about recent topics and then suddenly switch to events from several years ago. Sometimes she seemed well informed about current events, while at other times, her reactions to things like, the recent earthquake was scary, were oddly subdued. She would repeat the same stories and then abruptly fall silent. Back then, I was completely thrilled that I had gotten to know a cute girl, and I didn't notice this peculiar behavior. But in hindsight, I can't quite describe it accurately. It's as if she didn't share her own experiences, but instead had learned bits of information from elsewhere, like she had just memorized them. There was definitely an unnaturalness and discomfort in Akemi's behavior. However, amidst my excitement at the time, there was one thing that bothered me. Every time the train moved slightly and jolted, click, click, I heard this strange sound, like two hard and light plastic objects colliding. I looked around to figure out what was making that sound, but I couldn't identify its source. Akemi noticed my puzzled expression and asked, what's wrong? Since I didn't know where the sound was coming from, and didn't think much of it, I replied, oh, it's nothing. As for the source of the sound, I would later find out. When the train approached the station just before our destination, Akemi's phone in her bag began to ring. She opened her bag and reached for her phone, but I saw something unbelievable inside her bag, and my thoughts came to a halt for a moment. Inside the bag were 2 enormous Chinese kitchen knives, heavily rusted and in terrible condition, clearly unsuitable for a teenager to be carrying. In fact, it was unimaginable for anyone to casually carry such items. Akemi quickly closed her bag, but there was no mistaking what I had seen. Meanwhile, the strange, click, click, sound continued. That's when I finally snapped back to reality and started analyzing the situation. Doubts arose in my mind. Isn't it strange for such a cute girl to suddenly strike up a conversation just because our eyes met? There's no such thing as an easy win like that. Is this girl dangerous? It wasn't just a suspicion, it felt more like a certainty. And so, feeling that it would be bad to disembark at the destination station as it was, I decided to get off at the next station for the time being. However, there was the possibility that she might follow if I got off, and if that happened, I wouldn't have an excuse, making the situation even worse. So, I decided to get off just before the train doors closed at the next station. As I was contemplating this, the train arrived at the station. Akemi was still on the phone, occasionally glancing in my direction. I couldn't make any careless moves every time our eyes met. I felt a chilling sensation down my spine. I waited for the right moment with a forced smile. When the musical signal for departure chimed, I told her unilaterally, "Sorry, I'm getting off here," and rushed off the train. As expected, Akemi didn't react, and the train departed. Having narrowly escaped danger, I thought about what to do next. A's apartment was still quite a distance away. In fact, I had only been here for 2 months, and I had no idea about the directions to my destination from here. However, taking the next train was risky because if Akemi was waiting at the next station, it would be even worse. I had no choice but to call A, ask for the address, leave the station, and take a taxi to A's place. Considering the risk of encountering Akemi again, the expense of a few thousand yen seemed like a much better option. When I arrived at A's house, I was greatly relieved. I excitedly explained the whole situation to A and B, who obviously didn't believe a word, laughing and teasing me with, "You're making this up, lol." Just then, the doorbell rang. It was almost 11 o'clock at night, and there was no reason for visitors at such a late hour. I thought to myself, no way. I was completely shaken off, when B jokingly said, "Isn't it Akemi-chan?" When B uttered those words, all of us, including himself, froze. Rather, it would be more accurate to say that I, who had heard those words, turned pale and looked shaken, which led them to suspect something was amiss. A said, "Hey, is that story from earlier real?" While saying this, he decided to check who was at the door using the peephole without making a sound. After a while, he returned to us and said, "There's an incredibly cute girl smiling in front of the door." In the meantime, the doorbell rang several times. Upon hearing this, C said, "Are you serious? Why is someone tailing you?" But I had no idea why someone would follow me in the first place. I said, "I'll go check if it's really Akemi-chan or not," and headed towards the entrance quietly to see it for myself, using the peephole to look outside. There, with a perplexed expression, was Akemi-chan. This was quite alarming. Why was she here, and why was she following us? We weren't that close, and we had only talked briefly on the train. It seemed unfair, and while returning to the room, I told the others that it was definitely Akemi-chan and we discussed what to do next with the 4 of us. First, the pretending no one is home strategy was useless. The lights in the room were on, and we had been talking quite loudly just a moment ago, so it was obvious someone was home. Second, I thought about hiding in the closet while he answered the door, pretending not to know me and claiming it must be a mistake if they asked about me. However, considering that the other person might be, in a literal sense, that type, they might not accept such an explanation. Besides, we were dealing with someone potentially carrying dangerous weapons, and opening the door would be too risky. As we were discussing this, we heard Akemi-chan's voice from outside saying, "Kun, are you in there? I saw you coming in. Why are you running away? That's mean. Please explain properly." A said in a panicked tone, "You're being followed, aren't you? And did you just say your name? What are we going to do?" We wondered how she managed to follow me here in a taxi after I had gotten off at the previous station, but dwelling on that question wouldn't help at this point. While we were having this hushed conversation, an unpleasant noise started coming from the door. Screech, 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 screech. It sounded like metal scraping against metal. I went to check the door, peeking outside and returning with a worried look, whispering, "This is really bad. She's scratching the door with a knife. Seriously, she's dangerous." During this time, she kept calling my name and saying things like, "Come out properly, let's talk," while her actions and words didn't match. All this commotion seemed to have irritated our neighbor because we heard a loud shout from behind the door, "Shut up. What time do you think it is?" Then, after a moment of silence, we heard someone say, "Oh no, it's him," followed by a loud slam as the door was shut aggressively. And once again, that eerie metallic sound echoed. Screech, 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 screech. Things were escalating rapidly, and we were wondering what had happened to our neighbor, whether they were okay. The situation was clearly worsening. We tried to come up with various plans, but nothing seemed feasible on the spot. As we pondered what to do, we noticed the flashing lights of a police car outside. We couldn't hear any sirens, but someone must have called the police. Just when we felt relieved, we heard a voice from outside saying, "Wait," followed by the sound of someone running, and then everything went quiet. Next, the doorbell rang, and a police officer asked through the door, "Are you okay?" It seemed like we were saved. A opened the door, and we all explained the situation. It turned out that Akemi had pushed one police officer and fled toward the back of the apartment complex, climbed over a fence, and escaped. The police were currently in pursuit. I informed them that her name was Akemi, she was a student at the same university as us, and that she seemed to be targeting me. They agreed to patrol around my apartment for a while and provided emergency contact information before leaving. By the way, it was our neighbor who had called the police. According to them, as soon as they shouted at Akemi, she remained silent and began swinging the large Chinese kitchen knife, prompting them to close the door and call the police. Fortunately, no one was injured. As for what happened next, there was another incident around the end of June, but the story has become quite long, and it's getting late. I'll continue the story on Sunday night. By the way, it turns out that she wasn't enrolled at the university, or at least, the police were unable to identify her. Akemi-chan Part 2. It had been over a month since the May incident when things took another unsettling turn at the end of June. By that time, the police had stopped their regular patrols, reassuring us with words like, "Call us if anything happens." I had become quite complacent, believing that nothing would happen again. Perhaps that was a mistake. On that day, I suddenly felt hungry in the middle of the night, so I decided to walk to the convenience store near the train station to grab a snack. I recall that it was around 10:30 or 1100 p.m. After shopping at the convenience store and stepping outside, I noticed that despite the trains not having finished for the night, there were remarkably few people at the station square. It was a situation similar to the previous incident, but I didn't pay much attention to it and began walking. As I walked down the dimly lit night street for a while, I reached the park I usually passed through. There, I noticed someone sitting on a bench, faintly illuminated by a street lamp. Due to the distance and the limited brightness of the lamp, I couldn't see who it was. I thought, what is someone doing here at this hour, and intended to keep walking past the park. However, the figure noticed me and started running towards me. It was only when I saw that it was likely a woman from her silhouette that I realized I had made a grave mistake. As she came closer, I recognized her. It was Akemi. Akemi-chan had a smile on her face as she said, "We finally meet." She was holding a slightly larger bag, and it was easy to imagine that the Chinese cleaver I had seen before was inside. For some reason, even in that chaotic situation, I was quite confused, and I remember thinking, if it weren't for Akemi-chan, this would be the perfect situation, which was an irrational thought at that moment. While pondering these thoughts, I also realized that I needed to find a way to escape. Akemi-chan was still about 4 to 5 meters away. She was wearing some sort of heeled sandals that didn't seem suitable for running. In contrast, I had sneakers, and having been on the basketball team in high school, I had some confidence in my physical fitness. I believed that I could outrun her if I started running immediately. Running toward my home wasn't a good idea, so I decided to make a quick turn, about 90 degrees, and sprinted in a different direction. As I ran, I recalled what the police had told me, "We'll register your phone number. So even if you can't talk, just make a call, and we'll send a patrol car to your apartment." In a hurry, I reached into the pocket where I usually kept my phone, but it was gone. I checked the other pockets, including the back pocket, but it wasn't there. Then, I remembered that I had left my phone plugged into the charger, thinking that I would return home soon. I deeply regretted my own carelessness. I let out a rather pathetic scream and fell flat on the ground. Akemi-chan seemed to find this amusing as she looked down at me and chuckled. Her smile was still incredibly cute, but in this context, it was all the more eerie. Even in this humiliating situation, I tried to muster some bravado and asked quite assertively, "How do you keep finding me, both this time and last time?" Akemi-chan, still giggling, replied, "Because, I'm inside your jeans pocket, Kun. So, no matter where you are, I can find you." I couldn't make sense of it. This girl was definitely not normal. I had never encountered a so-called real one, but if this was what a real one was like, it was unsettling. I was taken aback, and then Akemi-chan added, "It's the right back pocket toward your butt," implying that I should check my pocket. Afraid of what might happen if I resisted, I remained seated on the ground, raised my hips slightly, and checked my pocket. Inside, I felt something long and slender. A battery? I thought, but as I pulled it out and the dim light from the street lamp hit it, I realized it was something resembling a human finger. Once again, I let out a pitiful scream and threw the finger-like object onto the ground. But as I threw it and took a closer look, I realized that, based on the feel and texture, it couldn't possibly be a real finger. It seemed to be some sort of mannequin or imitation. Akemi-chan smiled sweetly and said, "You shouldn't throw it away," as she picked up the finger and bent down in front of me. She then returned it to my pocket and whispered something in my ear. "If you ever throw me away again, I'll kill you." I wanted to say something in response, but I was so overwhelmed by the situation that my mind went blank, and all I could manage was a twitching expression. This is bad, incredibly bad. She's beyond crazy. I need to do something quickly, or she'll kill me. But my mind was in complete panic mode. It was impossible to think rationally in this situation. Akemi-chan then said, "There's no point in talking here. Let's go to your place," as she grabbed my arm and effortlessly pulled me up. Just to clarify, I'm 175 centimeters tall and weigh 72 kilograms, so I'm not a small guy. Her strength was far beyond what you'd expect from a teenage girl. In stunned silence, I allowed Akemi-chan to pull my arm and guide me towards my apartment. It seemed like she had already figured out where I lived. At that moment, I noticed something strange. I heard a clicking noise, like plastic hitting plastic, repeating with each of Akemi-chan's steps. She was walking with a smile on her face, and it finally dawned on me that this clicking sound was happening with each of her footsteps. I had no idea where it was coming from at the time. As we walked, Akemi-chan appeared quite pleased with herself. She firmly held onto my arm, showing no intention of letting go. I racked my brain for a way to escape this situation before reaching my apartment, but no viable solution came to mind. Trying to physically overpower Akemi-chan, who seemed to possess an impossible level of strength, was out of the question. As a result, I arrived at my apartment with no clear plan in sight. Upon entering my room, Akemi-chan started to enthusiastically inspect it. She commented, "Men's rooms are usually quite messy," as she looked around. However, I was anything but relaxed. While she was currently in a good mood, I knew that this blatantly unstable individual could turn hostile at any moment. If her mood soured, I might end up in a very dangerous situation. Then she said, "Your room is messy, I'll help you tidy it up," and I couldn't believe my ears. From an outsider's perspective, this situation might seem like a dream come true, inviting a new girlfriend to your room for the first time. However, the reality was far from it. The one in my room was a deeply disturbed girl with a massive Chinese cleaver hidden in her bag. And I was nothing more than a hapless prey caught in her clutches. As I pondered this, Akemi-chan began sorting and organizing the various magazines, manga, textbooks, and other items that were piled haphazardly in a corner of the room, all while making that distinct clicking noise with every step. At one point, she apparently found her hair bothersome, so she casually brushed it aside. That's when I saw something unbelievable. When Akemi-chan brushed her hair aside, her neck revealed faint lines. These lines extended toward the back, but at the very top of her nape, they seemed to be misaligned, as if they didn't properly connect. That particular spot looked like it didn't fit together, and whenever Akemi-chan moved, it produced that clicking noise. It was a brief moment, but there was no mistaking what I saw. There was a clear seam on Akemi-chan's neck. My mind was filled with question marks. What is this? What am I seeing right in front of me? My perception of Akemi-chan shifted from being a dangerous, mentally unstable person to something entirely inexplicable. As I stared intently at Akemi-chan's neck, contemplating all of this, she seemed to notice and said, "What's the matter? Aren't you embarrassed?" with a cheerful smile, all while continuing to tidy up the room. At that moment, likely items she intended to organize later, such as textbooks and dictionaries, fell from a shelf just above her. There was a loud thud, followed by a pained, "ouch," as she rubbed her head, casting me an apologetic look as if she had clumsily bumped it. But her appearance was bizarre. It was evident that her neck was misaligned from the spot where the line had appeared earlier. Akemi-chan nonchalantly adjusted her neck, saying, "Ah." Then, as if nothing had happened, she resumed organizing her books and magazines. However, my mind was in a state of panic. What on earth is that? What did I just witness? It was all too bewildering. The only thing I was certain of was that the thing in front of me was clearly not human. In a state of panic, I contemplated what to do next. Suddenly, my eyes landed on my mobile phone, still plugged into the charger by the bed. This is it. This was what the police officer had said. Just make a call, and even if they don't respond, they'll send a patrol car to check. I had to reach for the phone without arousing Akemi-chan's suspicion and do so as inconspicuously as possible. I began to move cautiously toward the bed to check the phone, hoping Akemi-chan wouldn't notice. But she, without even looking in my direction, casually remarked, "Don't touch the phone. This can't be happening." She figured it out. I was left stupefied and couldn't make a move. Akemi-chan then got up and came over to me. She took the phone from the charger, put it in her bag, and without a word, returned to tidying up the room. I needed to think about what to do next, but the shocking events had left me too shaken to gather my thoughts. As I glanced around the room, I noticed an electric kettle with its contents still inside. That's when I thought of a method I would never have considered under normal circumstances. There's a substantial amount of hot water inside this kettle, and if I hit her with it, maybe. I'm not usually one to advocate violence, but given the extraordinary circumstances and the fact that Akemi-chan was clearly not human, there was no room for hesitation or moral qualms. Summoning all my resolve, I tightly gripped the handle of the kettle and screamed, "Ooh ah ah!" With all my might, I swung it at Akemi-chan's head. She was sent flying to the opposite wall and fell to the ground. As I tried to gauge her condition, she lifted her upper body, complaining, "Ouch, what are you doing?" I was frozen with fear as I watched Akemi-chan. It wasn't just her strange response, it was what I saw when she raised her upper body. It's hard to describe, but from her nose upwards, or perhaps from just below her eye sockets upwards, a section of her face had detached and fallen away, leaving her face with only the area below her nose intact. It was incomprehensible. Although I was momentarily paralyzed by the shock, I quickly snapped back to reality. Throwing the kettle at Akemi-chan, I dashed toward the front door, then fled outside. When I reached the road, I hesitated and glanced back at the apartment building. That's when I witnessed yet another unbelievable sight. My room was on the second floor, and Akemi-chan was hanging out of the window, holding a large knife in one hand and her own detached head part in the other, all while looking directly at me. She was about to jump down. Panic overwhelmed me, and I was so terrified that I felt like I might wet myself. Tears welled up in my eyes. I didn't care about directions or destinations, I just ran with all my might. From behind, though quite far away, I could hear that incessant clicking sound. Kachi, 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 probably Akemi-chan chasing after me. I thought, if she catches up, I'm done for. Then, I remembered something she had said earlier, if you throw me away, I'll kill you. What did she mean by me? Was she referring to that finger? It didn't make much sense, but it seemed crucial. Still, I had no idea what to do. If I didn't throw it away, she'd chase me endlessly. But if I did, she'd kill me. In reality, given the circumstances, whether I threw it away or not, if she caught up to me, I'd likely be killed. At this point, the problem wasn't about whether to throw it away or not, but rather, how to throw it away. While contemplating this, I kept running and eventually reached a major road. About 100 meters past the road, I saw what appeared to be a Shinto shrine gate. Without any rational basis, I thought, this is it. Despite being completely exhausted, I summoned the last of my strength and sprinted across the road, passing through the shrine gate. From my pocket, I retrieved the doll's finger and threw it inside the shrine's precincts. Simultaneously, from the direction of the road, I heard screeching brakes followed by a loud thud. Through the shrine gate, I saw a car stopped. Did it hit Akemi-chan? Fearfully, I ventured onto the road. There, a man in his 30s was standing in front of the car, talking on the phone, presumably with the police or an ambulance. Oddly, despite looking around, I couldn't spot anyone else nearby. I approached the man and asked, what happened? He responded, well, I should have just hit someone just now. But as you can see, there's no one here. I thought I'd better call the police anyway. At this point, it was evident that Akemi-chan should have been hit by the car. However, when I glanced towards the edge of the road, I noticed some debris scattered around. Tentatively approaching, I realized it was the remnants of a doll. Judging by the clothing on the torso and legs, it unmistakably belonged to Akemi-chan. I was bewildered. While there were signs resembling a doll, they didn't look as blatantly cheap and artificial as one. They had more lifelike qualities. What was this? Had tossing it into the shrine accomplished some kind of purification ritual? Could such a convenient explanation even be possible? My mind was filled with question marks, yet the reality before me remained unchanged. Shortly after, the police arrived. As a potential witness or, in some sense, a victim, I explained the situation. However, my account was so baffling that the police found it hard to believe. The person who had supposedly hit Akemi-chan was also struggling to comprehend the inexplicable. They seemed to be speaking somewhat excitedly to the police. There was one strange detail, though. Normally, dolls have joints that connect their limbs to the torso, right? This doll, however, had no discernible joints. Even the police found this peculiar. It meant that there was no obvious way to connect the limbs to the body. Given Akemi-chan's earlier appearance and the lack of joints, it led to unsettling speculations about what might have been inside. However, I had no way of knowing what happened next, as the police took the doll's remains as evidence and left. The ending is strangely abrupt, and in reality, nothing significant happened afterward. When I returned home, it appeared that someone had reported the incident, as the police arrived. They took Akemi-chan's bag from the room as evidence, but ultimately, there was nothing that could help identify her. However, I received some odd information about her mobile phone later on. The phone she had seemed to have been cancelled many years ago, and according to records, it should have been disposed of a long time ago. It wasn't a device capable of receiving calls. To this day, I haven't encountered Akemi-chan again. Nonetheless, I still avoid places that are suddenly deserted or weren't popular to begin with. They give me an eerie feeling. As for the doll, there are many aspects to imagine, but I'd rather not speculate. Overthinking it might make it seem more real and scary. I'll leave that to your imagination as you read this. How was it? What on earth was Akemi-chan's true identity? In my personal opinion, I believe she might have been a tsukumo-kami, or some form of talisman. I've also covered stories related to tsukumo-kami and talismans in the video, and you can find the video URL in both the video description and the comments section. Please take a look when you get a chance. If any of you have thoughts or opinions about Akemi-chan's true identity, please share them in the comments section. If you have any other stories you would like me to introduce or any questions about the stories, please leave a comment. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thank you, and stay tuned for the next episode.